300,000 years ago, the planet was inhabited by multiple human species. Among them, two were most prominent: Homo sapiens and Homo neanderthalensis, commonly known as Neanderthals. These two species coexisted during the Middle Paleolithic era, occupying overlapping but distinct regions. Both left a significant mark on human evolutionary history. Homo sapiens first appeared in Africa. They had a lighter skeletal frame, a rounded skull, and a prominent chin. Their toolkits were complex, their social networks wide, and their cognitive flexibility advanced. Language capabilities, symbolic behavior, and abstract thinking set them apart in many archaeological findings. Neanderthals evolved in Europe and Western Asia. Their anatomy was adapted to cold climates, broad chests, shorter limbs, and large nasal cavities to warm the air. They had thick bones, strong musculature, and heavy brow ridges. Though often portrayed as primitive, Neanderthals demonstrated sophisticated behavior, including tool use, burial of the dead, and possibly even symbolic expression. Despite their differences, Homo sapiens and Neanderthals shared fundamental survival challenges. The environments they lived in were diverse and often harsh, ranging from African savannas to glacial tundras. Life was not guaranteed. It depended on mobility, cooperation, and knowledge of the surrounding world. And at the core of all survival strategies was food. Diet dictated movement, social organization, and innovation. There were no farms, no stored grain, no domesticated animals. Every calorie consumed had to be hunted, gathered, or scavenged. This meant understanding seasons, migration routes, edible plants, and animal behavior. Food wasn't just sustenance. It was energy for the body, raw material for the brain, and a daily test of adaptability. Fail to find it, and the group risked starvation. Succeed, and they could feed the young, care for the old, and plan for tomorrow. Eating was not passive. It was a full-time engagement with the landscape. Homo sapiens and Neanderthals developed different techniques to acquire food, but both relied heavily on foraging and hunting. Archaeological evidence shows that Neanderthals preferred large game hunting: mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, and reindeer, often using thrusting spears in close-range encounters. Their robust physiques supported this strategy. Homo sapiens, by contrast, used more advanced projectile tools, including throwing spears and possibly bows in later periods. Their dietary patterns were more varied, incorporating fish, shellfish, small mammals, nuts, seeds, fruits, and roots. The broader range of resources may have contributed to their long-term survival. Geographic distribution also played a role. Neanderthals were concentrated in colder, northern environments where plant diversity was limited. Their diets were more meat-focused by necessity. Homo sapiens thrived in warmer regions with greater ecological diversity, allowing a more balanced intake of both animal and plant-based foods. Tool use was central. Stone tools, scrapers, knives, and hand axes allowed butchering of animals, processing of plant matter, and food preparation. The mastery of fire by both species enabled cooking, which improved nutrient absorption and made tough materials edible. Charred remains and hearths are common features at both Homo sapiens and Neanderthal sites. Understanding the diets of these ancient humans helps reconstruct how they lived. What they ate influenced their biology. Meat-rich diets provided amino acids and fats essential for brain function. Wild plants supplied fiber, vitamins, and minerals. Seasonal shortages meant they had to move, adapt, and sometimes go hungry. This was not a uniform experience. Climate fluctuations and regional differences meant that diets varied significantly. Some groups near coastal areas relied on fish and shellfish. Others in inland forests focused on large herbivores and seasonal plants. Diet was localized, not standardized. Studying food remains, isotopic analysis of bones, and tools found at archaeological sites gives insight into the evolutionary pressures these hominins faced. It also informs modern understanding of metabolism, health, and nutrition. The way early humans ate shaped not only their survival, but their physiology and cultural development. In summary, 300,000 years ago, Both Homo sapiens and Neanderthals relied on diet as a critical component of life. It wasn't optional, it was central. Their eating habits reflected their environments, their technological abilities, and their social structures. Food was more than fuel. It was a driver of evolution. Part 2. Unveiling the Paleolithic pantry, what they ate. The Paleolithic diet was shaped by environment, season, and necessity. Contrary to modern portrayals, it was not limited to meat or simplistic in composition. Homo sapiens and Neanderthals consumed a wide array of foods, depending on what was locally available and what they could access using the tools and skills of the time. Plant foods were essential. Despite popular myths, plants constituted a significant portion of the Paleolithic diet. Wild berries, edible leaves, nuts, seeds, roots, and tubers were gathered with precision. Archaeological findings support this. Grinding stones containing starch residue, fossilized plaque with microscopic plant fragments, and preserved coprolites all confirm that plants were part of daily nutrition. These plant foods provided essential fiber, carbohydrates, and vitamins. Tubers like yams and cattail roots were boiled or roasted. Wild legumes required soaking or cooking to remove toxins. Nuts such as acorns and hazelnuts were processed and stored. Some groups even consumed wild grains such as einkorn and barley, long before agriculture. In coastal areas, seaweed was part of the diet, offering iodine and other trace minerals. Meat consumption was significant. Meat offered high energy returns, making it a priority when available. Large mammals such as mammoth, bison, reindeer, wild cattle, aurochs, and horses were common targets. These animals were hunted using coordinated group tactics. Wooden thrusting spears, stone-tipped javelins, and strategic ambushes allowed groups to take down prey much larger than themselves. But hunting was high risk. Injuries were common. The meat, however, was dense in calories, proteins, and fats. Beyond muscle tissue, hunters sought out liver, kidney, brain, and marrow, organs rich in nutrients like iron, vitamin A, omega-3 fats, and cholesterol needed for brain function. Small game filled dietary gaps. When large prey was scarce or inaccessible, small animals became important. These included hares, rodents, birds, amphibians, and reptiles. Snares, traps, and simple throwing tools like sticks or stones were used. In forested regions, squirrels, pigeons, and frogs were common. Feathers and bones found in hearths suggest repeated consumption of avian species. Aquatic resources played a key role. Fishing and coastal foraging expanded food options. Evidence shows that early humans exploited rivers, lakes, and ocean shores. They consumed freshwater fish such as trout and perch, and marine species like shellfish, mussels, oysters, and sea urchins. Fishing gear, including bone hooks, net weights, and spears, appears in later Upper Paleolithic sites, but even earlier groups exploited water sources. Mollusks were especially important for their fat content, particularly omega-3 fatty acids. This is linked to neural development and may have influenced early cognitive growth. Shell middens, piles of discarded shells, are archaeological markers of repeated exploitation of coastal food resources. Insects and honey were also consumed. Insects offered a reliable protein source. Termites, caterpillars, and grasshoppers were harvested in certain regions. Bees' nests were raided for honey, a high-energy, nutrient-rich resource. Burn marks and honey residue have been found in some prehistoric cave sites, suggesting early culinary use. Food was not randomly consumed. It was selected and processed. Not all plants were safe. Some required detoxification. For example, acorns needed leaching, and certain roots were only edible after prolonged boiling. This knowledge was not intuitive. It was taught and passed down. Older individuals played a key role in food education, teaching others which species to eat, how to process them, and when they were in season. Fungi were a dietary risk. Some mushrooms are deadly, and recognizing edible varieties required precision. Mistakes were fatal. This further confirms that food knowledge was cultural, learned behavior embedded in community experience. Preservation and storage extended food access. In some sites, remains show that meat was smoked, dried, or cached in cold areas like caves or pits. This prevented spoilage and supported survival through lean months. Bone fractures indicate marrow extraction, and skulls were cracked to access brain tissue. No part of the animal was wasted. Plant foods were sometimes stored in woven baskets, skins, or pits. Seeds were dried, and nuts were kept for later cracking. These storage behaviors indicate forward planning, memory, and food management. A clear sign of advanced cognition. Food variety was shaped by geography. Neanderthals living in glacial Europe consumed more meat out of necessity. Plant resources were seasonally limited. In contrast, Homo sapiens in Africa had access to diverse plants year-round, leading to a more balanced diet. This dietary flexibility may have contributed to the longer survival of Homo sapiens. Social structure supported food acquisition. Hunting and gathering were not individual acts. They required cooperation. Dividing tasks, tracking prey, processing food, and protecting resources were collective efforts. Sharing food reinforced bonds and increased group survival. Evidence of communal hearths, shared tools, and organized hunting sites supports this. In summary, the Paleolithic diet included a wide spectrum of resources: plants, large and small animals, fish, insects, and honey. It was regionally adapted, seasonally variable, and culturally transmitted. It required ecological knowledge, physical effort, and social cooperation. The diversity and complexity of ancient human diets stand in stark contrast to the uniformity and processing of modern food systems. Our ancestors' dietary practices were shaped by nature, necessity, and survival, not convenience or taste. Part 3. Survival strategies, adapting to the environment. Diet was not fixed. It shifted constantly in response to environmental changes. Both Homo sapiens and Neanderthals lived in fluctuating climates: dry seasons, wet seasons, glacial periods, and interglacial warmings. To survive, they had to adapt their dietary strategies accordingly. Flexibility was essential. Seasonal variation dictated availability. During spring and summer, fruits, leafy greens, and insects became more available. These food sources were perishable but offered quick energy and essential vitamins. In fall, nuts, seeds, and tubers were gathered and stored. Winter brought scarcity. In colder climates, fresh plants were rare or non-existent. Groups relied on preserved meat, dried berries, and fatty tissues saved from earlier hunts. Food choices were not random. They were seasonal responses. This required tracking seasonal cycles, remembering the timing of migrations, and understanding the rhythms of the land. Hunting large mammals followed similar seasonal logic. Some animals migrated, others bred at specific times. Groups had to anticipate movements and set ambush points accordingly. Fire changed the possibilities. Mastery of fire fundamentally transformed food preparation. Both Homo sapiens and Neanderthals used fire not only for warmth or protection, but to cook. Cooking made otherwise inedible or dangerous materials edible. Fibrous roots softened. Starches became digestible. Harmful pathogens in meat were neutralized. Nutrients became more bioavailable. Charred bone remains, hearths, and soot layers in cave shelters confirm consistent fire use. Burned plant fragments show that roots, tubers, and seeds were regularly exposed to heat. Roasting and boiling increased the diversity of usable food sources. Fire also allowed groups to stay longer in cold environments and cook communally, expanding food sharing behavior. Tool use was a form of environmental adaptation. Tools enabled early humans to access food that would otherwise be inaccessible. Sharp stone flakes allowed skinning and butchering. Heavy hand axes split open bones to extract marrow. Scrapers cleaned hides and processed meat. Grinding stones crushed seeds and nuts into flour or paste. These tools were not uniform. Their designs varied by region and time period. This reflects innovation and adjustment to specific ecological niches. In coastal regions, pointed tools for fishing were common. In forested areas, tools designed for wood processing appeared. Toolkits were tailored to local challenges. Toolmaking also demonstrated cognitive planning. Producing a sharp edge required knowing which rocks to choose, how to strike them, and how to maintain edges. The widespread use of composite tools, wooden shafts with stone tips, indicates forethought and material collection across time and space. Preservation extended food availability. In environments with harsh winters or unpredictable seasons, food could not be consumed immediately. Techniques like drying, smoking, and fermenting were used to prolong shelf life. Meat was dried in the sun or smoked over fire to reduce spoilage. Fish was fermented or buried in cold pits. Fat was stored in animal bladders or bones. Storage pits and cache sites are found across multiple Paleolithic sites. In some regions, food was buried in permafrost or stored in cool cave chambers. This shows strategic behavior aimed at survival beyond the immediate hunt. Such tactics reduced dependency on daily success. In times of scarcity, stored food allowed continued survival. It also enabled longer stays in one area, reducing the energy spent on relocation. This practice laid the groundwork for more permanent habitation patterns in later human history. Mobility was integral to survival. For both Homo sapiens and Neanderthals, staying in one place for too long often led to depletion of local resources. Groups had to move to follow animal herds, reach seasonal plants, or avoid harsh weather. This required physical endurance and knowledge of terrain. Routes were often cyclical, revisited annually with expectations of renewal. Rivers, migration corridors, and plant-rich zones became predictable landmarks. Knowledge of these routes was maintained and passed down. Some archaeologists interpret repeated campsite use as evidence of memory and long-term environmental mapping. Cooperation increased food efficiency. Survival strategies were not isolated to individuals. Hunting large game required coordination, surrounding herds, driving animals toward cliffs, or ambushing near water sources. Sharing food reduced waste and ensured that weaker or injured members also received nutrition. Gathering plants benefited from cooperation. While some foraged, others processed. While some hunted, others maintained fire or protected dependents. Such division of labor and mutual dependence increased overall group efficiency. Survival depended on continuous adaptation. It was not enough to find food once. Groups needed to find food repeatedly, across seasons and changing climates. Success depended on multiple factors: knowing the landscape, recognizing edible species, preparing food safely, storing surplus, and working together. Environmental instability demanded innovation. When certain animals disappeared from an area, groups had to switch targets. When drought affected plant growth, they had to seek alternatives. Those who adapted survived. Those who did not disappeared. In conclusion, the survival of Homo sapiens and Neanderthals was closely tied to their ability to adapt their diets to diverse and changing environments. Through fire, tools, mobility, and preservation, they built a flexible food strategy rooted in observation, memory, and innovation. This adaptability was not optional. It was the difference between extinction and endurance. Part 4. Nutritional Insights, the science behind their diet. The Paleolithic diet, as understood through archaeological and biological evidence, was composed of whole, unprocessed foods. It stood in contrast to modern diets high in refined carbohydrates, industrial fats, and synthetic additives. Nutrition science today increasingly recognizes the potential advantages of ancestral dietary patterns, particularly in relation to metabolic health and disease prevention. High protein intake was fundamental. Meat consumption provided complete proteins, including all essential amino acids necessary for human function. These amino acids supported muscle growth, tissue repair, immune defense, and neurotransmitter production. Neanderthals, in particular, consumed a higher proportion of animal protein due to the colder environments they occupied. Fats from animal sources were equally significant. Bone marrow, brain tissue, and fatty meat delivered saturated and unsaturated fats, including omega-3 fatty acids. Marine resources, fish and shellfish, provided long-chain omega-3s such as DHA and EPA, which are critical for brain structure and function. These nutrients contributed to neural development and may have supported cognitive evolution in Homo sapiens. Wild plants delivered critical micronutrients. While meat provided macronutrients, plants offered a diverse array of micronutrients. Roots, leaves, seeds, and berries contained vitamins A, C, E, and K, as well as minerals like calcium, magnesium, iron, and potassium. Antioxidants from berries help protect against oxidative stress. Unlike cultivated crops, wild plants were more fibrous, with higher levels of phytochemicals. This supported a healthier gut microbiome and improved digestive function. The dietary fiber from unprocessed plants contributed to regular bowel movements and better blood sugar regulation. The presence of prebiotic compounds likely supported microbial diversity, which has known implications for immune function and mental health. Their diet had a natural metabolic balance. There were no added sugars, no refined flours, and no industrial oils. Carbohydrates came primarily from fibrous vegetables, starchy tubers, and seasonal fruits. The glycemic load of the diet was relatively low, leading to more stable insulin levels and better energy regulation. The absence of dairy, grains, and legumes in many regions also reduced exposure to certain anti-nutrients like phytic acid or lactose, which some individuals struggle to digest. While this exclusion wasn't necessarily intentional, it may have minimized inflammation or gastrointestinal issues in some populations. Because of these factors, the metabolic profile of Paleolithic humans likely included better insulin sensitivity, lower blood pressure, and healthier body composition. Conditions like obesity, type 2 diabetes, and heart disease, which are common in modern societies, were likely rare or absent. Diet influenced brain and body evolution. Many researchers link the growth of the human brain to changes in dietary composition. Increased access to calorie-dense foods, especially cooked meat and fat, provided the energy required to sustain a larger, more complex brain. Raw plant-based diets alone would not have met the high metabolic demands of hominin brain expansion. Cooking also increased caloric yield. Heating starchy roots gelatinized the starch, making it easier to digest and absorb. This allowed early humans to extract more energy from food with less chewing and digestive effort. Cooking also reduced pathogens, which may have lowered the incidence of foodborne illness. Fat-soluble vitamins A, D, E, K, present in animal organs and fatty tissues, played critical roles in vision, bone health, blood clotting, and hormonal function. Vitamin B12, found only in animal products, supported nerve function and red blood cell production. These nutrients were not optional, they were essential, and their availability through diet likely affected evolutionary trajectories. However, challenges existed. Despite these nutritional strengths, life in the Paleolithic era was not optimal by modern standards. Food availability was unpredictable. Drought, disease, injury, or unsuccessful hunts could result in starvation. Nutrient deficiencies occurred during periods of scarcity. Trauma, infection, and environmental stressors were common causes of death. Lifespan averages were short, often 30 to 40 years, but this figure is skewed by high infant mortality. Individuals who survived childhood could live longer, sometimes into their 60s. However, the risk of malnutrition was ever present. There were no supplements, no hospitals, and no stable food supply. Moreover, the diet was not universally ideal. Some groups lacked access to specific nutrients depending on geography. For instance, inland populations may have consumed less omega-3 than coastal groups. Winter conditions limited plant access, increasing reliance on animal foods, but also raising risk during unsuccessful hunts. Lessons for today's nutrition. Despite limitations, the Paleolithic diet resembles many features of diets now recommended for long-term health. High protein intake, unprocessed plant foods, omega-3 fats, and low sugar consumption form the basis of modern anti-inflammatory and low glycemic dietary models. The Ancestral model encourages eating whole foods, avoiding processed ingredients, and aligning food choices with natural availability. These principles are reflected in Mediterranean, hunter-gatherer-inspired, and low-carb diets popular today. Understanding the nutritional profile of our ancestors helps contextualize modern dietary challenges. It also provides a biological reference point. Human metabolism evolved in a specific nutritional environment. Deviating too far from it through artificial additives, refined carbohydrates, and hyperpalatable foods may contribute to chronic disease. In conclusion, the Paleolithic diet was rich in essential nutrients, tailored to survival in varied ecosystems, and likely supported robust physical and cognitive health. While it was not without risk, its structure offers useful insights for contemporary dietary reform and metabolic resilience. Part 5. From then to now. Lessons for today. Studying the diet of early humans offers more than historical insight. It provides a framework for addressing modern dietary problems. The habits that sustained Homo sapiens and Neanderthals can inform present-day choices about food, health, and lifestyle. The core principles of their diet, simplicity, diversity, and alignment with nature, are increasingly relevant. Whole food over processed food. Early humans consumed only whole foods. Every meal came from raw, unprocessed sources: plants, animals, and natural fats. There were no preservatives, colorants, emulsifiers, or added sugars. All food was prepared manually, often using fire or basic tools. Today, processed foods dominate global diets. Industrial processing adds calories while stripping nutrients. Artificial additives alter metabolism and affect long-term health. Diets high in refined carbohydrates and trans fats are associated with obesity, cardiovascular disease, and diabetes. Re-embracing whole foods, fruits, vegetables, meat, fish, nuts, seeds, and unprocessed grains can help restore metabolic health. Minimizing packaged and industrially altered foods reduces toxin exposure and supports stable blood sugar and energy levels. Seasonal and local eating. Prehistoric humans ate what was available in their immediate environment. Their diet changed with the seasons. In spring and summer, they consumed fresh fruits, leafy greens, and insects. In fall, they gathered nuts and tubers. In winter, they relied on preserved meat and fat. This pattern promoted ecological balance and reduced overexploitation of any one resource. It also ensured nutrient diversity across the year. Modern food systems provide year-round access to the same products, often imported from distant regions. This disrupts seasonal rhythm and increases the carbon footprint of food. Eating seasonally and sourcing food locally can restore environmental sustainability and improve freshness and nutrient density. It also connects people to regional ecosystems and farming communities. Diversity and balance. Ancient diets were naturally diverse. There was no single staple crop or food group. Nutrients came from a range of sources: wild plants, roots, berries, animal organs, bone marrow, shellfish, and insects. This diversity ensured a broad spectrum of vitamins, minerals, and macronutrients. Modern diets, especially in urban areas, are often monotonous. Industrial agriculture promotes consumption of a few refined staples: wheat, corn, soy, leading to nutritional gaps. Returning to dietary diversity, especially including lesser-known vegetables, wild foods, and organ meats, can improve micronutrient intake. A balanced diet composed of proteins, fats, fiber, and carbohydrates from whole sources, aligns more closely with human metabolic needs. Food as culture and connection. In prehistoric groups, eating was communal. Food was hunted, gathered, prepared, and shared together. These activities reinforced cooperation, knowledge transmission, and social bonding. Meal times were tied to ritual, storytelling, and identity. Modern life has fragmented this. Meals are often eaten alone, quickly, and without preparation. The cultural and emotional value of food has declined. Convenience has replaced connection, restoring communal eating practices. Cooking with family, sharing meals, preparing food from scratch can improve mental health and social cohesion. Food should not only nourish the body, but also strengthen human relationships. Awareness over automation. Ancient humans were fully aware of their food sources. They knew how to identify edible plants, track animals, prepare meals, and avoid poison. This awareness was essential for survival. Today, food production is outsourced. Most people cannot identify the origin of their food, how it was grown, or what additives it contains. This detachment reduces accountability and increases health risks. Awareness begins with basic steps: reading ingredient labels, avoiding ultra-processed products, supporting ethical sourcing, and learning how to cook. These actions reflect the instinctive human drive to control what enters the body and how it is used. Modern application without imitation. Living like a hunter-gatherer is not practical or necessary. However, applying their dietary principles, unprocessed food, diversity, seasonal variety, and communal meals offers measurable benefits. These principles can be adapted to modern contexts without replicating prehistoric life. For example, choosing wild-caught fish over processed meat, eating leafy greens in season, or cooking with simple ingredients rather than buying ready-made meals all echo ancestral habits. Incorporating intermittent fasting, reducing sugar, and using natural fats instead of refined oils are also aligned with ancient metabolic patterns. Limitations and context. It is important to acknowledge that prehistoric life involved constant risk. Food scarcity, injury, infection, and limited medical knowledge created challenges that modern humans do not face. The goal is not to romanticize the past, but to extract useful strategies from it. Nutritional science can combine modern understanding with evolutionary context. Tools like clinical research, food safety standards, and personalized diets should coexist with ancestral insights. Conclusion: the Paleolithic diet was not designed. It was the product of necessity, ecology, and human ingenuity. But its structure, rooted in unprocessed, diverse, and functional foods, remains relevant. Modern humans face different challenges: abundance, chronic disease, environmental degradation, and disconnection from food. Learning from the past provides a map for addressing these problems. What our ancestors ate helps shape who we are. Their food fueled survival, growth, and innovation. Today, it can guide us toward health, sustainability, and renewed understanding of what food means, not just as a product, but as a foundation of life.